Westchester Dateline, the talk show program that offers in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. My special guest this evening is Congressman DioGuardi, representing the 20th CD. Congressman, welcome back to Westchester Dateline.
Nice to be here again, Dennis.
Good to have you back. Joe, since you've last been on the show, much has happened, especially in the area of taxes and budget reform. Basically, I wanted to ask you, recently Congress has passed the tax reform, well, it didn't pass it, but they've been speaking about a tax reform proposal that has been passed, and now it's going to be presented to members of Congress. What is your view on this subject?
Well, that's probably one of the first orders of business when we get back to Congress next week. It did pass the Senate, as you know. The conference committee got together. My view is that the country is ready for tax reform. We definitely need a tax code that is in reality and is perceived to be fair and simple. The real issue is that estimates are that $100 billion in taxes go uncollected each year. That's because people find excuses not to pay taxes. They either say that the code is too complex or it's not fair. Corporations are getting away without paying taxes. And I think that the reforms that we're going to see in this bill are reforms that are going to make the people feel good about becoming a partner in paying taxes in this country. We now have a minimum tax for corporations, which I think is a fair way to do things, because the public was perceiving this to be not a way to assess taxes. We've taken the working poor off the tax rolls, which I think is important. So I think that in the longer run, this tax bill is going to be very good for the country. In the short term, I hope that it doesn't do anything to slow down the economy. There's been some uncertainty with the effective dates. There will be a ratcheting in of the rates so that next year the high rate would be 38.5, and then the year after that 28. It might have the tendency to have people defer selling things to pay lower taxes. So I'm concerned that in the short term, this might cause a problem at a time when we're trying to get our arms around the deficit. But certainly I'm for tax reform, and I'm certainly for this particular bill.
Okay, so you would vote for it then?
Yes. By the way, New York State came out very well when you consider that both the House and the Senate agreed not to eliminate the deductions for state and local income taxes and the property tax. We would have wanted to see sales taxes, but we're not alone there. But clearly when it comes to income taxes and real estate taxes, we would have been severely hurt had they tried to take away those deductions.
So what you're saying is, although the bill is not perfect, it's a far advancement for the way things were, and you would definitely support it on that basis.
Yes.
Okay, you voted for Graham Rudman, correct?
The Deficit Reduction
Act, right. Now, there's been a large debate going on, pros and cons about Graham Rudman. Many people complain that we are spending too much, the huge deficits. That's why we need it. Some of the people that are running against you have proposed the argument, however, that with Graham Rudman, that it's just cutting, that what happens to programs that are desperately needed for the poor, what happens if we have problems like with the drugs, where we need to add more people on for drug enforcement, for mass transit. If Graham Rudman continuously cuts, then where do we go for emergency funds for these problems?
Good question, Dennis. Cuts should never be made indiscriminately and not just across the board. Congress's main function is to make qualitative judgments in setting priorities as to what's needed and what's not needed. Graham Rudman, or the Deficit Reduction Act, was not a product of one party. 74 senators voted for the Deficit Reduction Act, including Senators Kennedy and Chris Dodd, okay? And the majority of the House voted for it. With the spending cuts that were automatic spending cuts as a sort of Damocles, The thought there being that if Congress did not do its job, then the public could not wait any longer, that we needed some mechanism that would ratchet down the deficit over the next 5 years. Because Dennis, the estimation was that by 1991, 41 cents of every dollar would go just to pay the interest on the national debt. Now think about that. 41 cents of every dollar, 41% of the revenues. What business, what family could survive? That is bankruptcy. So we had to do something to ratchet down the deficit. And even Tip O'Neill said that the deficit would have been higher without Graham Rudman. I think the issue is simple, and I usually do this to a press conference. This card...
Can we zero in
yes,
closer
you can see
on that?
This card is the card that I use to vote when I'm in Congress for my constituents to represent this district. It's a computerized voting card. Take a good hard look at this card, Dennis. This is the most expensive credit card in the world. This card has no limit, or at least it had no limit until Graham Rudman. When you or your spouse at home get a call from either Diners or American Express that you've reached your limit, whether it's $2,000 or $5,000, you know that economic reality has set in. You sit down with the family, you reorient your priorities, you may have to defer a vacation, you know that you can't go above it. Not with this card. We just reached $2 trillion, and what do? We just keep bumping up the limit, pass it on to the kids. Now, New York City had a card just like this in 1975, and the Congress took that card away from New York City. Yonkers had a card like this, and shortly thereafter, New York State took it away from Yonkers. We now have to take away this credit card and the credit card mentality in this country, just passing everything on to the kids to pay for. Otherwise, we're going to be in a terrible shape in the 90s. And Graham Rudman is the first step in that direction to take the annual deficit, that's $200 billion in round numbers, and all it says is that over 5 years, and by the way, this is the first time I've seen a strategic plan in government. Simple. It says ratchet down the annual deficit by 20% a year. Next year, the deficit would be 160, year after 120, then 80. Does that mean we're paying off the debt? No, the debt's $2 trillion, and you're adding 200, 160, 120. We're going to $3 trillion in debt, even with Graham Rudman. Now, we've got to do something about the spending, but that's not to say that we should do things across the board. We should continue to make qualitative judgments, and where we need programs, like for drug abuse, and there's an omnibus drug bill that's going to come through that I will support, and that I think will be supported on both aisles, we cannot hold important programs hostage to a budget crisis. What that means is we better find out which programs are not working and which are wasteful. So the issue is put the pressure on these agencies to find those non-essential programs so we can make the money available for the good programs.
Okay, but what happens if you have certain situations where you need certain catastrophic situations show up? As I use the example of the drug problem, where you need to get funds. I think what people are afraid with Graham Rudman is, will they be locked into a blind cutting program? Will there be room if they have to switch money over in different areas to do that? Is there flexibility?
There is program, because I don't know of any congressman that would ever relegate his authority or his responsibility to set priorities. Graham Rudman is an incentive to set those priorities and set them soon. But if you don't set them, something has to be done to contain the level of the debt that we're passing on to our kids. Because if we don't do something, then the alternative is worse. As I said, by 1991, if we don't do something, estimates are that 41 cents of every dollar would go just to pay the interest on the national debt. You know what we borrowed this year to pay for interest? $155 billion. That's with a B. Not one of those dollars went to a road, to creating jobs, to a good social program. And where did they go? To people of affluence who could afford to buy bonds and treasury bills. It's the most regressive tax of all, interest. Worse than that, it went to foreigners. Because we have a lot of foreigners who are investing, and thank God they are, because we don't have enough money here to fund our own deficit. So the point is that we've got to understand what's happening, and we have to have a longer view and say, hey, while we're trying to set priorities, let's not keep our eye off the ball, that we can't increase the debt to the extent where we now crowd out all programs because we have to pay the interest or go into default.
Okay. There are One of the other things we've mentioned about, with the spending crisis, and it involves foreign policy too. Um, Before we used to have a microeconomic society, now macro. How about our trade policies? Should we have higher tariffs for foreigners? I mean, we're in a global economic situation. Just quickly, are we going to have to change in that respect also to help balance our budget?
Well, we're going to have to become more competitive on the world markets, and we're going to have to condition our people to save more. Japan has a personal savings rate of over 15%. In this country, it's below 4. It was higher when I first got into Congress. It was above 5. So we've got to do things to encourage people to save, because that's the money that's then provided to recapitalize industry to become more competitive. The issue is that we have to remain globally oriented on trade. We can't set off protectionism by coming up with tariffs, because we will be, in the long run, the loser in that. Does that mean that we should not look at unfair trading policies? No. I think we've got to look at those industries and those countries where this country is being unfairly abused. And I think we sent a very strong message to Japan that they've got to open up their markets to us, and they've got to get away from any dumping policies or subsidizing of their industries. Otherwise, we're going to have to take some action. So I think, Dennis, the issue is not just free trade, it's fair trade. And I would hope that we never get into a situation where we retaliate against countries that are doing well because they're more efficient than we are. The key is to compete with them on that playing field and not to react by putting in a tariff, because they will then react by doing the same, and the markets will be closed both ways, and many people feel that it was the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that created the Great Depression. So I think we've got to be careful that we compete fairly or compete globally, and make sure that there are countries that are competing fairly with us. Where they're not being fair, we should immediately take steps to be sure that we have a level playing field.
Okay, let me ask you again, this relates to the budget, although it's on spending of military weapons. Your critics, meaning the people that are running for Congress, have labeled you as or tried to label you as a hawk on defense spending. What exactly? I mean, you haven't supported every military program. Let's get the true picture. The latest military intrigue. What's that weapon system?
Dividend Defense Initiative, or
no, that comes later. There was a specific weapon system that the military was spending on.
they got rid of the gun, the Sergeant York.
Yeah,
weapon.
it's right. Let's have some of your views, how you voted on those systems, and what you think generally of that.
This is, Dennis, the classic example of what happens with political rhetoric. The view that I could have increased defense spending. Since coming to Congress, I have been a staunch proponent for a freeze in defense spending. And I'm delighted to say that when we passed the budget resolution this year, it was a freeze not only in real dollars, in nominal dollars, which means that there was actually a cut, $292 billion. You know what the president was looking for? An 8% increase, which would have been an increase on approximately $300 billion, in real terms, about 24 billion bucks. So that would have been 320. We ended up with 292, where I wanted to see it. So, when I announced over a year ago that I would never support a tax increase until I saw the waste out of the system, and I would never support an increase in the military until I saw the Pentagon properly managing the huge budget that we have, you would not see me vote for these things. We got what I wanted. So the issue here is that I have been for over a year now a freeze in defense spending because of the waste that I've seen. Does that mean that I'm not for a strong defense? No, I want a strong defense. But when you're talking about $300 billion, that's a lot of money. It's the largest program we have. There's a lot of room for improvement when you hear the stories of the $7,000 coffee pot and the $700 toilet seat, the $500 ashtray. I'm saying keep the pressure on the Pentagon to keep finding these things. And if they really need a program, then let them get the money from non-essential programs, but keep the lid on. So all this rhetoric about me being a hawk, me increasing the defense budget, it's a bunch of nonsense. And obviously it'll come out in the direct debates with the opponent that we have.
Okay, I want to ask you about the Strategic Defense Initiative, but we have to pause for this message. We'll be right back.
It's one of those days when everything goes wrong. It starts off bad and gets worse all day long. It's one of those days when you catch the blame for things you didn't do. It's one of those days when you need a friend to pull you through. Bad days need good friends like you.
Adopt your own good friend today.
Okay, Congressman, there's a debate going on in this country as far as how strong do we have to be strong. And of course, the other thing is we had talked earlier in the program about balancing the budget. One of the questions surrounding the Strategic Defense Initiative programs, it's called Star Wars, is are we spending too much? As far as I know, it's just for research now. We're spending a lot of money. It may not even take place in the Reagan administration. And the fear that this could lead to the ultimate destruction of the world. What is your view?
Well, I'm glad you called it a research program because that's what it is. And I think everyone benefits when we have research, not only the military. I think we've seen that.
But how about the price of it?
Oh, well, again, getting back to what I said before, we have now a freeze on the military budget. Whatever one votes for, whether it's so-called Star Wars or something else, it has to be within the context of the freeze. So where I am being distorted by my opponent is when they say that I'm trying to increase the military budget. I'm not. What I'm saying is the cap is $292, but within that cap, let's put our money where it's most effective. Let's get rid of a Sergeant York gun, which we did, and maybe let's find some other weapon systems that are not effective or wasteful, and put our money where it's effective. Dennis, look what happened. 2 years ago, no one could have thought that we would be sitting down talking with the Soviet Union. One summit, now we have another one coming up. Who would have thought that we would develop a dialogue on reducing weapons that we're into right now?
Do you feel like Star Wars is responsible for that?
There's no question. The Soviet Union knows that we have a technological edge. Our computers dwarf their capacity right now. Their population doesn't have a facility with computers because they don't want their population to communicate too well. Ours has that facility, and we've developed a tremendous national facility in terms of computer technology and the ability to steer weapons. They fear that this will make obsolete 20 years of building up naval fleets, weapon systems. They have many more missiles than we have, but ours are much more accurate. So what got them to the table was President Reagan's ability to demonstrate he could be tough and he could use this as a bargaining chip, or he could suggest it was a bargaining chip. And I think that's why they're talking. Now, I don't think that we should question the way the president is handling this, because so far he's been very successful in getting them to the table. And look at the proposals that are on the table now with reducing weapon systems by huge percentages. We're heading in the right direction, Dennis. We want to see every nuclear weapon eliminated. There's no question. There's no room in the world for any nuclear weapons. But we can't be the only one to do it. We have to be sure that the Soviet Union is doing it at the same time. We have to be sure that we're allowed to monitor what they're doing. And now all of a sudden, they're talking about on-site inspections. Did they say that 1 or 2 years ago? No. I think that the Soviet Union realizes that they are in economic shambles. They have tried to build their economy on a military base and haven't been able to feed their people. And now their own farms are worse than what they were before. And unfortunately, they had this crisis with Chernobyl as well. I think all that is saying is that if we now obsolete what they're doing by coming up with a research program that we can implement, or at least we can probably perfect, I would hope that we don't have to implement it, but let's say we perfect it, then they're saying that would then obsolete everything. Where will they be?
Don't you think, though, that I mean, you're a CPA. Don't you think that they should be able to give us some bottom line as far as how much the program is going to cost? I mean, it's just as far as, cost to the country, because that we seem to be at a loss for estimates of how much it will cost.
And there were a number of amendments that came through on this, and I did not go for the president's proposal, which was, I think, upwards of $4.5–5 billion. I opted for the lower amount. I think it was $3.2 billion, which was basically a freeze in real dollars. So I feel that while we need this system, we need also some fiscal restraint in the size of the dollars that we commit to it, because too much too fast could result in waste even there. But what I'm saying is, we do need this program because it does give us, or it plays to our edge with the Soviet Union, but it needs to be done out of monies that are already committed to the defense budget, so that we do not increase the budget, but we have to force the Pentagon to eliminate non-essential programs to make money for an essential program, and I believe SDI is essential.
All right, let me ask you this, because it's come up on the other side, and I don't think women should have a monopoly on women's issues, and I want to ask you, what is your view on women's rights or women's issues? What is your view on that? How do you feel? Are you for women getting jobs in the workplace? Are you for reproductive, reproduction? Let's have your record clear so it's out in the open.
Okay. Women's issues, in many respects, no different from anybody else's issues. We have to create opportunity for everybody. And we have to, in terms of when you say equal rights, the issue is, are we enforcing the rules on the books right now? Are we creating equal opportunities by enforcing the rules there? Do we need additional rules to do this? My feeling is we don't need additional rules, that we've got to deal with the situation as it is and make the rules work. So obviously, I'm for building an economy that creates opportunities for everyone. And I think that my record stands firm on that.
Okay. One of the biggest priorities in Westchester has been the environment. Taking care of the water. We've had problems with the Hudson River, etc. The Democrats have tried to paint you as anti-environmental. For the Superfund, did you vote for that?
Yes, I did. I support the Superfund, and I supported disclosure on toxic substances. There's nothing in my record that would suggest that I was not someone who treasured our environment, and certainly as a legacy to the future. In fact, I worked, as you've seen in the press recently, with Mayor Zigarelli when the day was in Tarrytown. Made sure that the day I was notified, we got the EPA involved to be sure that this was being dealt with properly. I've let it be known that the Sound Shore area, the quality of water is a very important thing, and we've got to do all we can to make sure that it is not polluted. I'm working with town officials on that. I'm working right now, hopefully, to get money from Mamaroneck on its floodplain, a huge amount of money, $60 million. It's passed the House, and hopefully it'll pass the Senate shortly. So I think that my record on environmental issues is a good record.
Okay. With that voting of the Superfund, did you also support a value-added tax to fund the Superfund so that it would be paid by the taxpayers versus shouldn't we have the industrial companies pay for that instead?
Well, there are two approaches to it. I don't think that we should penalize just a few industrial companies. There was an attempt to impose this just on certain industries, and my feeling is that would not be right. I think that certainly everyone should be affected when it comes to the cost of protecting the environment, and those polluters should be dealt with very strongly. So basically, I would suggest that we need a broad-based tax to deal with it, and we should also enforce the laws that we have on the books right now to deal with polluters.
Okay, I just want to swing back quickly. just shortly, because there are two important issues in foreign policy. One is aid to the Contras. The other one is our policy with regard to South Africa. With regard to aid to the Contras, this country was involved in Vietnam for many years. I don't want to go into the pros and cons, but the bottom line is we lost a lot of people. We were in a foreign war. You know, don't we risk that same danger with giving aid to the Contras?
We risk an even greater danger if we don't, and that's the establishment of another launching pad for Soviet-Cuban aggression in this hemisphere. That was not an easy vote for me. In fact, it was one of the votes that where I was undecided and even invited into the Oval Office to have another discussion with the President himself. And I again came down on the side of national security, that the most important issue here is national security vis-a-vis Nicaragua. And by the way, the $100 million was not in addition to the military budget. That has to be taken out of the current, so we still have the freeze of the 292. It's not just a Republican issue. You had powerful Democrats, such as Claude Pepper from Texas, chairman of the, from Florida, chairman of the Rules Committee, and Dante Fascell, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, that see this as a national security issue. So until I get further information, so far I'm going to be very concerned when I see the presence of Soviet and Cuban advisors there in Nicaragua, and the size of the air base that's being built right now, which is 4 times larger than that country needs, and the fact that there are over 120,000 troops, the Sandinista Army, which is more than any other country in that area, that gives me great concern that we may be in process of establishing another launching pad as we had in Cuba for Soviet aggression, and my biggest concern then is national security.
Okay, 30 seconds. With South Africa, what was your, did you vote for that apartheid?
I was one of the earliest supporters of sanctions. I believe that apartheid is just a terrible system. I signed a letter to the president early on saying that something has to be done, but I think that these sanctions have to be ratcheted in. We can't just throw a hand grenade and hurt everybody in the process, but we definitely need sanctions.
Okay. I wonder if we can get a close-up of this. This is the Congressman on Management Accounting magazine. You've been out there proposing some revolutionary ideas, the way government should run. I believe you have a bill before the Congress, H.R. 4492, the Federal Financial Management Act. 95, I'm sorry, calling for a chief financial officer of the federal government.
Yes.
What makes you think in a system that we have where there's pork barrel, where there's lobbyists, I mean, how can a federal financial officer have the same independent authority as he would in the private sector, or she would in the private sector?
We're not looking for a chief financial officer to replace Congress. Congress still has to set its priorities, allocate the money through the authorization process and the appropriation process within the political system, within great sensitivity for what the needs of the people are, and within the economic framework that we have. Once that process is finished, and we then say that we have a $1 trillion budget, which is what we have this year, then we need a chief financial officer, and we need undersecretaries in each of the federal undersecretaries for financial management in each one of the 18 agencies and departments to then manage that money. So I'm not suggesting that there be an individual now to do the work of Congress. What I'm suggesting is that once Congress does its job, then they have to step aside, in a sense, and look to an individual, a quarterback, so to speak, to make sure this money is now being managed properly. Right now, the financial management function of government is totally decimated. You have the Secretary of Treasury over here. You've got the Office of Management and Budget over here, and it's not management, it's mostly budget. You've got the Office of Management Personnel over here, mainly dealing with personal evaluation, hiring, and firing, if you can fire somebody. And you've got over here the Comptroller General and the Government Accounting Office. And then we even have the Congressional Budget Office advising us. But nowhere is the linchpin of financial management discipline to be found, the quarterback. In a large corporate entity, you need a chief financial officer. And we need one because we have Mickey Mouse accounting principles being used, the cash basis. Don Regan said that just recently. You've got incompatible accounting systems. The Controller General said we have 427 in the 18 agencies, and you've got incompatible computers. So we've got to deal with managing our resources better so that the public gets $1 worth of goods and services for $1 worth of taxes. That's what my bill, the Federal Financial Management Improvement Act, would do.
Thank you very much, Congressman, for coming on. My guest has been Congressman Joe DioGuardi, representing the 20th CD. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Westchester Dateline. Good night.